Welcome to the Property Nomads Podcast. Welcome to some property news. And this is something you may or may not be aware of, but no-fault evictions are set to be banned in England. And if you're wondering why I say England and not the UK, it's because everything's different in Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland. Everything with the devolution of power means that this is a white paper for England and not for the other parts of the UK. Ooh, where to start with this? This is tough. I'm going to try and give both sides of an argument here, because you're going to have as we'll find out, your sort of left-leaning people that, we must have rent controls, we must have this, and evil landlords, blah, 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 versus more the landlord side, the right-hand side. And I'm being very, very basic with terminology here. A lot of people on the right are going to say, well, hang on a minute. If a circumstance arises and I need or want my property back, then if you're then telling me I'm not able to do that, then what happens here? What happens if you do have bad tenants or, things like that? And everyone who has been through the experience of court knows that it's not always the easiest and time efficient thing to do. And at the end of the day, as landlords, we're running a business, not a charity. Yes, we're here to provide good quality housing for the people. That's what we do. That's what you should do if you're a landlord, provide good quality housing. At the end of the day, some people will argue that this is just another thing stacked on landlords, and it seems to be the easiest thing to do in the last few years is just have a good old dig at landlords, have a bash at landlords. Anyway, I will try and provide the best opinion that I can. I'll try and make it as fair as I can as well, without getting on my political high horse. I don't always give the BBC too much credit, but that being said, the article they produced about it, again, very basic, but tells you pretty much everything you need to know. So it's known as the Renters Reform Bill. It will end blanket bans also on benefit claimants or families with children, and landlords must consider requests to allow pets. Again, advantages, disadvantages here. It depends, if you're running a business, depends on what area you're operating in. If you're operating in an area where there's quite a lot of unemployment or things like that, sometimes there's nothing wrong with people that are claiming benefits, because, they're being handed their cash or their currency by the government. Fine, that is what it is. I think if you can get the right systems and whatnot put in place, then actually that's not a bad thing at all. So credit where credit's due to the Renters Reform Bill. If you want to allow benefit claimants in your home, fine. I know many landlords already do, and they haven't had an issue at all. So I think that's a stigma that can change over time. Families with children, again, families with children, not an issue with that. If you're buying good quality property in good areas where you've got good access to good schools and all those sorts of things, you get a family that move into one of your properties, they might stay there for a very, very, very long time. I think that's a very good thing to happen. Again, if you're buying in the right area, you're doing your right homework, you shouldn't really have an issue with families with children, to be honest. The other thing that's going to end a blanket ban on, landlords must consider requests to allow pets. I'll be honest, we allow pets in our properties anyway. There's a study a few years ago, it might have been Property 118, it might not have been. Apologies if that reference is incorrect. There's a stat out there that if a tenant has a pet, they will more than likely end up in your property for a longer period of time. Of course, if you've got that, then you've got more stability, which isn't a surprise. If you look at some disadvantages here, you might have issues along the pet side. You might have issues with fleas or pets ruining the carpet or whatever it might be. Again, if you get benefit claimants, you might want to put your own stipulations into your tenancy agreement. And again, families with children, children like to draw on the walls, mess around with things and all that sort of stuff. All of these things, I think, can be covered by having a bulletproof AST. If you've got a watertight AST, chances are you'll be absolutely fine. So, for example, if someone in one of our properties wants to have a dog, for example. Now, we've had this before back in the early days when we didn't know what we didn't know. One of the first tenants that had a dog, we didn't change the AST. Unfortunately, the council had to be called out, flea treatment, etc., etc. And that was cash out of our back pockets. So we learned from there that actually put in the AST. Yeah, if you want a pet, that's absolutely fine. But, if they're ruining, the walls, the carpets, or any flea treatment or whatever needs doing, then it's the responsibility of the tenant to pay for that, not the landlord. To my understanding, that is a perfectly legal thing to put into a tenancy agreement. And since then, we haven't had any issues at all, because it's very clear to the tenants in the first place that if that situation arises, there you are. So that's that. Of course, left-leaning shelter called it a game changer because, all landlords are bad and, they kick tenants out without any reason and, blah, blah, blah. I won't get on my political high horse about shelter. I will keep this as mutual as I can. At the same time, you've got landlords associations that are saying that government need to make sure that the changes would not worse than the housing crisis. The BBC reports 2019-2020, 8% have been asked to go by their landlord. Fine. I mean, that doesn't sound unreasonable to me because every circumstance is different. For example, if you live in a block of flats and the block of flats needs a really big renovation, for example, it needs, new boilers putting in or whatever it might be. If the tenant's not allowing access or anything like that, and you need to get the works done, because, you've got an order from the council or whatever to get the works done, and the tenant's not playing ball, unfortunately, you've got to get the tenant out in order to get the works done. Because if they're not allowing, you in and you're going to get slapped by a fine for the council, this is just an example, you need to get the tenant out, or what are you going to do? Section 21, happy days. So it's those sorts of situations that will crop up that need to be sorted. When we say this is a bill for England at the start, just to mention that no-fault evictions are already banned in Scotland for tenancies starting after the 1st of December 2017. Welsh governments say no-fault eviction notice periods will be extended to 6 months by the end of 2022. Legislations are in Northern Ireland at the moment. It's going through the Northern Irish Assembly at the time of recording. Of course, the BBC, being the BBC, have put in a couple of sob stories there as well. Look, don't get me wrong, if you're a tenant and you're in that situation and you get told to leave, I understand that is probably going to be quite a distressing thing, especially if you haven't got anything lined up or you're low on cash, as quite a few people are at the moment. I can understand that would be quite a distressing thing to happen. But whenever I look around on Rightmove and look around at potential stock, places that are available to rent, I've not seen many issues at the moment. Yes, you could argue rents are going up quite considerably. Well, there's multiple reasons for that. Number one, the currency's being devalued by that much at the moment. It's resulting in inflation. So again, that's not useful. I appreciate that, and that's going to be around for quite a while. Yet Shelter getting on their high horse. Executive Polly Neate saying all the renters reform bill is a game changer for England's 11 million private renters. Scrapping unfair evictions will level the playing field. For the first time in a long time, tenants will be able to stand up to bad behaviour instead of living in fear. Gone will be the days of families being uprooted, children forced to move school after being slapped with a Section 21 no-fault eviction for no good reason. Yeah, okay, Shelter, fine. Whatever. Yes, if you're in that situation and you do get served a Section 21, that's got to suck. But you have to look at the reasons as to why Section 21s might be happening. And a common thing from sitting in various landlord meetings as well is issues with condensation and or mould. Now, that's quite an interesting subject in itself. Might be worth a different podcast in the future. But if you get, let's take ventilation. So, you've got people that, let's just say got a family living in a 2-bed flat. It's a mid-floor flat. They do, all their washing and everything inside the flat. Excuse me. But they, don't open the windows, or, they're cooking and they're not opening the windows, and all of a sudden the condensation builds up and builds up and builds up. And of course, as you get your hot spots and your cold spots, what will happen is that condensation, because the tenant's not ventilating the home properly, will end up being some form of mould. And if that allows to carry on, that will end up with black mould. Black mould, I think, is one of the biggest killers in rented accommodation in the UK. And that's not always the landlord's fault, because as a landlord, you go back and say, you've got to work with the tenant, either work with the tenant directly or through your lettings agent. You've got to go back and you get, look, hey, this is where we're at. if you're washing, if you're cooking, you've got to allow that airflow in your home. You've got 3 or 4 people in there breathing all the time. If you're not opening the windows, you're not allowing the airflow through, this is why this has happened. And there have been instances that I've known of, and I won't mention names, I'm not allowed to, where you do get, these start quite big arguments because, tenant thinks you're treating them like a baby and all that sort of stuff. And at the end of the day, from the tenant not looking after the property, it's making the property worse, and then that affects the landlord. Now, if the landlord's then not able to get rid of that tenant, then you've got an issue there. So there have been examples in the past where, that's happened. Landlord serves Section 21. Family goes out because they're, not listening to the landlord or whatever it might be. Yeah, that's unfortunate for the family. The landlord there's got to deal with the damage that the mold, black mold, etc. has caused internally. Has got to find a new tenant for said property. That's just an example of, in my eyes, how that's a fair Section 21. It's not necessarily victimising the family. It's saying, look, we've tried, we've talked about a few things, it hasn't quite worked out, I need you to go. But of course, Shelter will take the absolute opposite stance to everything. They're as bad as the RMT. That's a different podcast in itself. And what the government's also promised tenants their stronger powers, basically, to challenge poor practice and unjustified rent increases. Again, yeah, fair enough. At the moment, we're in a situation where everything's going up quite a lot. And again, that's down to various issues to do with inflation, currency devaluation, that sort of stuff. We're in very strange times at the moment. So, rent increases will happen. But I understand, if your landlord puts the rent up by 30%, I'd be questioning that as well. Stronger powers include to obtain rent refunds for unhealthy, unsafe or poor quality homes. Its decent homes standard will be extended to the private sector, meaning homes must be free from serious health and safety hazards. Landlords must keep homes in good state of repair with clean, appropriate and usable facilities. Well, all of that makes sense, absolutely. As a landlord, we pride ourselves on providing the best quality accommodation that we can. Does that mean we get things right 100% of the time? No. I'm sure, as with most people, no one's perfect, put it that way. There are rogue landlords out there that don't give a shit. They're the people that need to be sorted out with. They're the people that need to be dealt with. So when it turns around and says, homes must be in a good state of repair, clean, appropriate and usable facilities, understandable, absolutely fine. Not an issue with that at all. That makes perfect sense. We're all here to help each other. To obtain rent refunds for unhealthy, unsafe or poor quality homes. Yeah, okay, fair enough. I think that's open to negotiation. How do you define unhealthy? How do you define unsafe? If it's unhealthy because the tenant's made it unhealthy, again, let's go back to that condensation, damp, etc., then you should be able to obtain rent for that. That's a bit daft. A rent refund for that, because that's the tenant's issue. If you do have a landlord that, hasn't put a banister in or, hasn't done a gas safety certificate, for example, absolutely. That, the home's unsafe. You should be, in my opinion, as a tenant, allowed to obtain a rent refund for that. Completely understandable. The one that gets me is where it says, with a decent home standard, homes must be free from serious health and safety hazards. Now, yes, on the outside of it, absolutely 100% agree. Having dealt with various councils, having dealt with HMO officers, health and safety officers, everything's open to interpretation. So what you and I might define as, not a serious health and safety hazard, actually the inspector for the council might decide it's a serious health and safety hazard. So I think that there needs to be a bit of clarity on that moving forward. If this reform bill is going to go through properly, there needs to be some clarification on that moving forward. Also, the flip side to all of this, just to point out, and this is why I've got it in sort of to an extent for Shelter, it's actually, if you look at quite a lot of the issues that tenants have up and down the country, sometimes they're not actually renting off a private landlord, they're renting off the council. So if the council's providing property that's unhealthy, unsafe and poor quality and has serious health and safety hazards, then is the tenant going to be allowed to obtain a refund from the council as a result of that? That's what I want to know. Because if they're going to do that and there's parity there, okay, fine, I understand that. But if this is one of those where it's one rule for private landlords, but a different rule if you're renting from the council, again, I think there's issues there and they need to be sorted out beforehand. Because we've all, or you've probably seen an article somewhere where someone says, the state of my kitchen and, broken windows or whatever it might be. And funny enough, that person rents off the council. So the councils need to, I think, buck their ideas up as well, in all fairness. It also says the bill will end arbitrary rent review clauses so tenants can leave poor quality housing without being liable for rent, double the notice periods for rent increases, give councils stronger powers to tackle the worst landlords, and increase fines for serious offences. Again, on paper, it seems okay, but I'll just reiterate that same point. What if the tenant's renting off the council? What are the council going to do? Fine themselves? Not sure that's going to happen. The taxpayer pays for it anyway. Double notice periods for rent increases. Again, yeah, on the scheme of it, seems all right, but you can always facilitate that in your AST anyway. So there's a way around that. End arbitrary rent review clauses. Not a fan of that. I think that, look, if you're a tenant and you've got poor quality housing without being liable for rent, well, there's an issue here because, if the tenant wants to leave and whatnot, then they can either hand in their notice, which means, a couple of months or whatever it is, and they should pay the rent, or if not, or funny enough, you could be served with a Section 21 instead. Bit difficult to do that if this bill's trying to get rid of it in the first place. Again, doesn't quite make sense to me. That's really about it from the proposed white paper. Again, we could get into the absolute political aspects of it. I probably mean this episode goes for another 20 minutes or so. But in short, just to recap this episode, as I've tried not to get on my political high horse, and I've tried not to ramble too much. Apologies if you think that I have. Nooks and crannies of the episode. Basically, new government white paper out. It's the Renters Reform Bill. What it will do is it will end blanket bans on benefit claimants or families with children. So as in, landlords must consider them, and also landlords must consider requests to allow pets as well. This is a white paper for England. The rules in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland are different. They're all in different stages at the moment. Left-wing shelter, I think it's an absolute game changer, makes everything more equal, etc., etc., etc. My argument to all of this is, well, most of the time, tenants might not have issues with private landlords as such, but actually renting off places like the council. Now that makes it interesting moving forward. Anyway, government's also promised tenants stronger powers to, number one, challenge poor practice and unjustified rent increases. Number two, to obtain rent refunds for unhealthy, unsafe or poor quality homes. The decent homes standard will be extended to the private sector, meaning homes must be free from serious health and safety hazards. And landlords must keep homes in good state of repair with clean, appropriate and usable facilities. And the bill will also end arbitrary rent review clauses so tenants can leave poor quality housing without being liable for rent. It will also double the notice periods for rent increases and give councils stronger powers to tackle the worst landlords and increase fines for serious offences. Two sides to it. Yes, of course, the left are going to be, super happy about this, etc., etc. I would say from a landlord's point of view, strengthening possession grounds of homes, court processes needs to be speeded up, mediation, they're all useful, but then there needs to be a lot of meat put on the bones, basically, in the bill itself. And as and when that happens, I'll keep you updated with another episode. And that is the Renters Reform Bill, and no-fault evictions could be banned in England under proposals from government's white paper.